drink. And so Mayor Smith, who would be, nibbling at salad and not drinking wine or beer, would be subsidizing me, who'd be pigging out and getting drunk. And that's how we charge for infrastructure in this country, and it's mad. From a competitive point of view, it is biting us in the butt that, particularly with broadband, which we invented, we're 36 out of the top 40 industrialized countries. And it's because it's so expensive to run the broadband to one-to-the-unit housing, as opposed to South Korea, which is the number one. Now, they've got the most dense, and I'm not suggesting that we all live like South Koreans live, but they've got nearly 100% broadband penetration because it's so cheap when they're living at 100 units per acre. So you can see that difference in density is why we have been subsidizing these things so drastically on the fringe, and it's going to hurt us economically tremendously, and it is.
Just a quick comment, and I appreciate the parallel between urban sprawl and picking out and getting drunk. I think we might want to use that one more often. So to return to the more Spartan, healthier lifestyle of denser development, I just want to bring this back to the particular decision point that we have on West Eugene MX here in the near future. I think we've talked about a lot of the land use and transportation decisions in Eugene recently as if they're decisions that we'll make and then we'll kind of be done. And if there's anything I've learned, I've been in Eugene about as long as Dave. I've been here a dozen years. It took me a while to realize the extent of the planning and the thinking that had gone on ahead of time. And of course, Transplan is the best example on the transportation front. But we seem to forget that it's not just these decision points, it's assembling a suite of policies in addition to the right decisions. And that going forward, if we want to do bus rapid transit, it's not build it and they'll come, it's build it, and then we need to keep doing those things to make this happen. And I think what's inspiring about the examples we've heard from our keynote speakers and the other panelists is that we have a large number of arrows in the quiver. We have things that we can do to make this happen, but we need to talk about it that way. We can't talk about it as, let's just build this and then that will make the future happen. No, we need to be talking about that broader suite of policies, and we need to be bringing that message to elected officials more often and say, it's this group of things that we need to do and we need to stay committed to over time to make this happen. It's not rocket science, but it's also not one single silver bullet.
David, I'm going to direct this question to you, although others may choose to answer it. How do we inspire those with money to invest in our community, to instill community pride? Because you've made investments here, and I think you're supporting other supporting investments.
Well, there's two aspects. There's inspiration and there's the nuts and bolts. I think inspiration comes from having, in part, people like our keynote speakers come today and teach us about how other cities have done this so we can learn from them. It's from having people who are passionate about the community. Those are kinds of things that we can plan to a certain degree by having events like this. But it's also just who we are as a community. There are just dozens and dozens of people in this audience who contribute to the inspiration that I found in this community. Don Cahill and Jerry Gatos and all the people out there, and Bobby Lee, who speak, who clearly love this community and are willing to sacrifice for it. Then there's the nuts and bolts. So the city has been instrumental in our company's development. The Denny Bro and the City Loan Office provided funding for us when we were barely break even. And a bank would not have been willing to provide funding for us. But that allowed us to grow and to get to the point where we could become a very profitable company. So now we're at 80 people for our testing company. And those kinds of commitments are critical. The nuts and bolts, I think, come from the areas that the keynote speakers talked about. So I'm not so up on those. I think, as I said, the city providing that kind of funding, The local banks in particular have been enormously helpful, as distinguished from the national banks that will cut and run when times get tough. They're here for the long haul, and they're willing to commit to the community.
Any other comments on the subject of inspiration or nuts and bolts? No? We want the nuts to bolt, actually, I think is what we want. One question here is from concerns the funding model for the Lane Transit District. It relies upon the employer-based tax, payroll tax, to fund the majority of its operations. How might we connect to a more sustainable operating funding source? So this is a simple, feel-good question about taxes. Who would like to take that on? People from out of town probably should volunteer,
the
right?
out-of-towners.
You're going to tax yourself, and just get real. We are among the least taxed people on the planet, and we're proud of it. And what we've seen throughout the country is increasing sales tax in particular as a means to provide for transit. There have been hundreds of bond issues over the last 7 years to build transit systems and to provide operating funds for those transit systems. And here you think we're in this anti-tax time, that you can't raise the concept of, you can't even breathe tax increase. 70% of those sales tax bond measures have passed in the last 7 years. In left-wing, wacky towns like Salt Lake City, Denver, Phoenix, Dallas, they're building these systems right now. And if you're not, you're going to be lapped. Again, keep in mind, transportation drives development. And if you want to build walkable urban places, you must invest in the right transportation system. So if you don't do this, you're just not committed to the 21st century knowledge-based economy. So if you don't do it, your kids are leaving, and the companies, such as David's company, won't show up. Now, the other thing is to hook on to the upside in the value creation along those transit lines. And again, I made reference to it that 100 years ago, real estate developers built most of the rail transit. And they weren't stupid. They did it for a reason. They were not choo-choo nuts, I'll guarantee it. And so the issue is how to tap into that. And there's a lot of new mechanisms, we don't have time to go into them, about how you can capture the value created. But a piece of research I managed going through Brookings looked at a streetcar line and really answered the question of why did those real estate developers do it 100 years ago? And we used the Portland streetcar and the Seattle streetcar and the Tampa streetcar, which is the only 3 modern streetcars that have a track record, so to speak. And we found that the projected increase of this one streetcar that we were studying, that if you captured 17% of the upside, you could pay for the entire system. That's how the real estate developers did it in the past. So it's a combination of different sources, but it's going to be primarily local, because if you haven't noticed, the federal government's broke. So it's going to be up to you.
And I would say look at your hometown as a business of which you are a stockholder in the future of that business. And really most of everything you have invested personally is in that business, that city. When your taxes then are an investment you're making, and if you look at it as a return on investment, here's what we're investing through our taxes in a system. What is that return going to be? Well, it's going to be in improved property values, very probably, and I think you're seeing that occur already to some degree, but it's going to be a great improvement in what it's like to live your everyday life in this city or these cities. I think if you look at it that way, as I'm investing, what is my return on investment, and that's how I sold these projects to the public in Meridian. Here's what you're going to get back. Now, fortunately, they return more than we estimated, and that's always a good thing when it does that. But when you have one winner and you celebrate it, then the next one gets a little easier and a little easier and a little easier. That's how I view it, and how I think you can really think about that as a community.
Just a quick comment, and I'm going to try to link inspiration and taxes, given the last couple of groups of questions. I think someone, I'm sure there's someone in the audience much more qualified than I to come up afterwards to talk to Chris and to tell him the history of the rejection of sales taxes in Oregon and leave him in a puddle of his own tears. But before we do that, I do want to, the link between inspiration and taxes at the local level, I think, and there are lots of examples of other cities elsewhere taxing themselves in order to build things that they want. We've rejected a gas tax and an income tax and a few other things here recently, but we did pass a bond measure to do street repaving and reconstruction because we saw the need and people were clearly, if you want to use the word, inspired to vote for that. I guess I'm hoping that we'll do something similar in the near future, not just to improve our roads, but to fund what I consider the most inspiring single piece of planning work that the city has done in years, and that is the pedestrian and bicycle master plan. And we are currently funding the efforts in the PBMP, as it's called. We will, at the current rate of funding, completely fund that plan over the next 171 years. I think we can do it a little faster. I'm asking for maybe 140 years, something like that. But very seriously, I think we need to get out there and tell people about the plans that we have. I think that's, in my opinion, that's the best example because it is inspiring. And you say pedestrian and bicycle, and it feels in Eugene sometimes to exclude a lot of people, but you need to tell people this is a pedestrian, bicycle, new urbanism, public health, smart growth, higher real estate values, more livability master plan, because that's essentially what it is. It's a whole series of investments focused on bike ped, but that'll have many of the kinds of effects that our keynotes have talked about.
And by the way, I bet there was some freeway rebuilding project over the last 10 years that was hundreds of millions of dollars, and you didn't even blink. You just said, oh, of course we have to do that. But then you put it into a bike trail, $10 million, oh my God, we can't afford that.
Quickly, inspiration is related to perspiration. I think we all have to sweat this out for the long haul. I think it's a real mistake. One of the speakers talked about our grandchildren. I mean, we're making investments now that will have an effect upon our children and their children's children and their children's children. And where do you draw the horizon? Where do you draw the commitment to long-term benefit? And we all know, we can look back in history, it's amazing how history repeats itself. The streetcar that existed and built cities and fell by the wayside because of the auto is now coming back because, we live to tell the tale that the future tends to repeat itself from the past. And I think the kind of investment and what we've seen from the past, we'll see in the future. We just have to wait out the cycles, but we have to believe in it, we have to invest in it, and we have to support it.
Here's a question that ought to resonate for the audience and for our speakers. How do you engage those who are opposed to projects and to create partnerships that engage them?
Okay.
They're so shy, it's kind of shocking. Jill?
Yeah. Well, I mean, clearly, you have to recognize as a developer that every project is a public-private partnership. It's just a matter of degree. And so going out to the neighborhood and the community that you're proposing to do a project in early and often is really important because, people, when they're engaged in the process, may come to understand a little bit more how challenging it is to accomplish, all the objectives that everyone might ideally like to see, and that all development is a compromise to some extent, and that the best development you can hope for is the one that's kind of hit the sweet spot of balancing all of the different things that you're trying to balance in any project. I mean, I do think there are going to be some people that are always going to be opposed to to change, to development because it's representing change. And for the individual, I think that's difficult because change is difficult. So then it becomes a question of balancing sort of collective good, and how you balance that with individual good. And there are some people that you may never make happy, but I do think people feel respected, that you at least listened to them and they had their say. And frankly, our process, I think, of working with neighborhoods tends to result in a better product. It doesn't mean we can do everything that every neighbor or community member wants, but they actually do bring up things sometimes that, we didn't think of, and we make tweaks that result in a better project.
Just to really echo what Jill said, I think the Envision Eugene plan that John Reese spearheaded and was supported by the mayor and the rest of the city council has been a huge success in opening the eyes of people in the community to the fact that people who disagreed with them weren't always crazy, that maybe there was some sense in what they were saying and could understand some common ground. Because we're never going to agree with each other on everything, but we have to at least talk to each other so that we can begin to respect the opinions of the other people. And this is a very soft, kind of squishy human thing, but we're all people. So I think that's really critical to the process moving forward. But I think we also have to have a vision that comes out of that. You can't just have process endlessly, which has been Eugene's kind of infinite loop problem. You have to come up with an answer and a decision and move forward at some point. And that comes from leadership and vision. And we're full of leaders with vision in this town. So I'm sure that we can make things happen. I think I have come to appreciate, as Josh mentioned, the depth of planning that went into the transportation system that the LTD is in the process of developing. The planning that went in for years before the BMX became a reality, the protection of funds so that LTD would have funds to match federal funds so that they could build the project. I think making those kinds of things more open to the public so that we understand what's gone into this process, that it's not just a group of people coming down from on high telling us this is what we need to do, will be helpful. And I think that Eugene and Springfield have both done a lot to move towards that stage.
Yeah, so I don't know what you're talking about with endless process. Does that happen? Does that happen? A couple of comments, just in terms of, first of all, how do you deal with opposition? First of all, you embrace it. I mean, we live in a democracy, and we should be pretty happy about that. And actually, the fact that we have a chance to have so many forums with opposing views, if we can do that civilly and learn from each other, that's not something that the whole world has. So I think that's important to say. The other thing is, if you can't explain the value of your projects to the rest of the world, then maybe you don't deserve to build them, or maybe they don't have the value. So I think we have to say that. Now, that doesn't mean convincing everybody, of course, but it means that then we have to talk to more than just the vocal opposition and the people who are vocally in favor of something. It means we have to get out a broader message, and it has to be a community conversation. And I guess the third thing I'd say we should do then is you elect a mayor like Kitty Piercy. You have someone who's committed to getting out. I mean, I know it's shameless, I apologize, but I'm saying you need elected officials. You need elected officials who are committed to going out and having that conversation. Kitty, I'm really glad that you're the one who has to go out and have all of those conversations rather than me, because it's not easy. But very serious. I mean, you have to have a conversation about these things. So to the final point about process, I think, and what Mayor Smith said really resonated with me about people saying good things or bad things about their communities. I hear a lot of people regularly beat up on Eugene. A lot of Eugene people regularly beat up on Eugene around process. There is a point at which you have to pull the trigger on certain projects, because if they don't get done in a timely manner, that doesn't mean be fast-tracked, but if they don't get done in a timely manner, then they don't get done in a relevant way, and that's a problem. But there is a part of process that does need to go on perpetually. You do need to revisit things like transplan over time, because some of us didn't live here when those conversations first happened. So this is tough. We need to have conversations, and we need to come to points of making decisions, but we need to keep the conversation moving at the same time. I think the best example of this is Measure 37. Do people remember Measure 37? No one talks about it anymore. It wasn't that many years ago. But we, in a general election, we actually reversed. The people of Oregon reversed our much revered land use law. How was that possible? Well, I think it was that we had stopped having enough of the conversation to remind people of why it's valuable. And we stand to lose a lot if those conversations die out.
Just keep in mind also about what walkable urban development is all about. As I mentioned earlier, it's more is better. It's a fundamental fact of how these places are and how that helps with NIMBY opposition. And particularly the NIMBY opposition will be scared about traffic and parking in their neighborhoods and noise. And in fact, walkable urban places make those neighborhoods far better. The research shows that those single-family neighborhoods that are close up to walkable urban places are experiencing a 40 to 100% price increase on a price per square foot basis because they can live in great suburban splendor and walk to great urbanism. They have the best of two worlds. They may not know that at the time, but once there's more experience with it, they will begin to understand that. So there is a time delay. But also keep in mind, one of the finest urban symbols in the world was also when it was proposed, as it was under construction, and when it first opened, was the most reviled urban symbol, and that was the Eiffel Tower. Can you imagine proposing the Eiffel Tower in Paris? And now it's the symbol of the entire nation. So we learn as a society, but it's more is better is our biggest asset.
We have come to the end of the time for the panel. Would you please give them a warm round of applause? And before I hand over the podium to Mr. Egan, I think we should also acknowledge the hard work of Cosette Reese and Tom Schwetz and their team putting this together.